Can I welcome you all to this EMCC Global GPS Dialogue? We're really pleased to have Janet with us here today. And I'm really excited for her session, which is around enabling clients to face everything and rise. Really delighted to welcome Janet back to the GPS session. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you straight over.
Oh, hi everyone. So I'm based here in Melbourne, Australia. So I wish those of you who are Southern Hemisphere based good evening, and others of you who are on the other side of the world, good morning or good afternoon. So I really am appreciative of you all being here to share the learnings of our Face Everything and Rise group learning program. So I do also speed talk like Nicola does. So I'm really glad she's doing a transcript. So I really want to thank you all for investing your time and energy. And it is a co-creative interactive dialogue. And my intention is to further your thinking in the area of change, adaptation, and innovation as a professional coach and mentor. So we will be exploring an evidence-based case study of a project that I did earlier this year with a global pharma, which was focused on enabling clients to face everything and rise, so face their fears, in the face of a lot of internal and external organisational challenges. So why is this important? What we did is we used a lot of these constraints that they were, or these challenges as constraints, to actually create an opening for what we call transformative innovation. So to shift them from inaction and inertia to actually taking what we call right or intelligent action, and more importantly, which is top of everybody's agenda at the moment, to resolve their fears of failure and their risk adversity by knowing how to normalise them. So I'll be sharing that with you. So please use the chat box. One of the things, for the sake of time, so I can give you in-depth information, is I'll be asking reflective questions, probably up with each slide. And feel free to respond in the chat box, but please make your own notes, because it doesn't matter what you know, what matters is what you do with them. So, think about, how can I apply this to my business practice? So I'll be answering questions at the end, and Nicola is kindly going to interject with any comments from the chat box. Please make sure to mute your audio, and if we could have videos off as we get started, and there will be 2 breakout room conversations so you can see where we're headed. So thanks for helping me out with that, and let me now go to the agenda. So as I said, I speed talk. The first thing I'll be doing is setting the context. And it's really important to understand how the external environment is compressing pretty well everybody at the moment. And then you'll be able to contextualise that to your own business practice in the first breakout. I will go in depth to the comprehensive client case study, which was an attempt to help this particular client be, the word we use is not only proactive, but responsive, provocative, and evocative, and creative, and ultimately innovative in this environment. We'll then break out and talk about how can you apply this, internalise it, and apply it to your client problems and situations. I'll share the results, and then we'll look at, so what can I do with this, and recap at the end. So I'm going to now get running. So some of you may have heard of this notion of BANI, and some of you may be more familiar with the notion of VUCA. So a guy called, actually he was a futurist and author, Jaime Cascio, proposed a new model to replace VUCA in an article called Facing the Age of Chaos. Why did he do it? He did it in order to describe complex changes and very much how do we deal with wicked problems. So consider this as a new thought model that starts to give us some context to the range of challenges and constraints in what is required to cope and ultimately flow in a changing world, in what Otto Scharmer calls a decade of both disruption and transformation. So he poses that VUCA is no longer sufficient to explain the current reality that we're going through. So just to give you a nutshell, and you can see at the bottom of the slide, there is a reference. If you want to read more about BANI in depth, you can see the link. And there's links pretty much on all the slides that I refer to. So the first thing is that brittle replaces volatility, because we know that the world is no longer just volatile. It's the speed of rapid change. And what's happening is that you're having rapid change in a whole lot of systems that are inflexible. So you can just think about the financial systems and the impact of crypto. You know, it's halved in value, and yet financial systems are still playing with interest rates and things like that. Anxiety reflects uncertainty. And I don't know about you, but every single coaching client I have at the moment is experiencing anxiety in some way, and it is based on fear. Fear that something significant can break away at any time, and there's all these unknowns and the lack of certainty that's causing the anxiety. Non-linearity is a continuation and an addition to complexity. Because the world we live in is extremely complex, that notion of cause and effect is not always a given. So how do we deal with this? So congratulations to all of you, because you've taken the first step. It's about developing knowledge. So deep learning, as Peter Senge says, but developing real knowledge about how to help people allow, accept, and acknowledge where they're at, respond rather than react to how they're being impacted, and especially use this unique moment in time to learn new ways, as did my client, to think and act differently, to adapt, innovate, and grow, to survive, to thrive, transform in ways that are sustainable, that add value in the face of all of this disruption. So that's the model. Now, as a result of this model, I've just done a quick summary of what I'm noticing, and you might want to add into the chat box what you're noticing in terms of client trends. You know, people are feeling overwhelmed, they're isolated, they're disconnected. We can use the term that Adam Grant introduced, they're languishing. There's a lot of inertia. I think that's really important. And I even heard the word today from one client of, what's the point? You know, it is a futility. And I was actually quite shocked when she used that. So what's causing it? Anxiety, self-siloed behaviours, feelings of lack of control, which mean that I'm feeling helpless, I'm feeling powerful and fearful for the future. So as coaches, we're in a really great position to help people through this. And it's a very privileged position, and that's where we're going to play. So I couldn't help but put this into the webinar after meeting with a coaching client today. She said, there's three things. She was instructed to read an article given to her by her company, which just happens to be a global financial services company. She said, when I saw these three headings, I absolutely freaked out and almost lost it. So futility, silence, and combative is how she described what's going on in her organisation today. So let's look at specifically how clients are dealing with this. The immobilisation, many people are unable to self-manage their work from home workloads and they're quietly burning out. They're being very transactional, very busy. They're working autonomously and they don't want to waste hours commuting. So there's a resistance about going back to the office. There's increased fear, which means that there's a lot less safety and trust. A lot of organisations, I know my clients are freezing change initiatives, learning programs and projects. There's a lot of job insecurity. Many people, the way I've described it, they're contracting deeper within their bubbles and they're becoming very passively defensive and avoidant, which is where probably the futility comes in. More importantly, there's a real lack of clarity and foresight for the future. So it's not only our clients that don't know where to go, it's their CEOs, their boards, and their leadership teams. So how is this impacting? Well, unfortunately, there's the resistance to change. So when fear happens, people become, as we said, frozen. So this resistance in going back to the office is adding to people's sense of disconnection and belonging. It's adding to increase risk, adversity, and conventional tactical and short-term focus that people are doing. And of course, that increased fear of failure. So people are staying in their comfort zones. They're not stretching themselves to adapt, grow, innovate. And because of their fear of failure, leaders aren't addressing issues of inclusion, belonging and identity. So you might want to put into the chat box what it is that you're noticing, and if these are true for you or not. So I'd be curious to see what's starting to come out. So the final thing that I want to cover before you go into the breakout rooms is also, this is going on within the organisations, within teams, within groups, within communities. But there's another lot of pressure coming in with accelerating and continuous digital and technological advances. It's non-stop. So if you think of it, in the last 10 years, we've got centralised work communications like Slack. We've got new formats for sharing our personal lives and marketing our businesses like Facebook and Instagram. We've got the dawn of temporary social shares like Snapchat. We've got virtual home assistants like Amazon Echo and Alexa. We've got smart homes like Google Nest. We've got virtual payment systems and card readers for small business like Square. We've got a happy medium between phones and computers, meaning tablets, and some of you are using your tablets right now. And we've got closer to home new innovative coaching platforms that are democratising coaching like Coach Hub and BetterUp, which are the two that I work with. And then we've got something else that is emerging called the metaverse. And you might be wondering, well, what is the metaverse and what do we need to be prepared for? It's based on the convergence of multiple technologies. So imagine these technologies being multiplied and the proliferation of data and content. So if any of you are working with BetterUp, you can start to see that that's pretty much what they're doing. You're actually getting measured and you're getting projects depending on the data and the data that is received from the clients that you have. The whole intention is to create value for users. So the metaverse encompasses broad categories of technology, including computing, connectivity, artificial intelligence, and machine learning that come together in rich ways to create unprecedented value. So you might want to consider how up to date are you with these trends and how have you applied them or not yet so far in your own business practice? And, how relevant are they for you to start consider doing that. But here's the thing, and I'll put this in, you'll see a lot of these wonderful gaping void cartoons. Technology is used by people. So that's one of the reasons why I started ImagineNation as an Israeli startup 10 years ago on the people side of innovation, because it's people who deal with change, it's people who innovate, it's people who use, create and invent new technologies. So therefore, we've got to be much savvier and much better equipped at pulling and inspiring people towards what could be possible in this BANI world that we're now living with. So let's look at now going into breakout rooms so that you can share. So we're going to go into breakout rooms, and I'm going to, Nicola's going to set them up, and I've posed 4 questions. And what I would like you to do is to have a conversation with the 3 or 4 people that you're with in the room around your responses to these 4 questions. I suggest you nominate a timekeeper and a note taker and a presenter, and you spend 3 minutes per question, and the breakout rooms will go for about 12 minutes all up, and then we'll do a quick debrief. Now, why is it important to do this? First thing is, great ideas can come from anybody, from any rank. So you're with a whole lot of great people, and I'm so thrilled so many of you have been able to come up. The other thing is that now is the time to hit your pause button, to get out of being tactical, reactive, and even if you're not being that, but to help your clients retreat and reflect and reboot, to reset in a BANI world. So if you want to quickly take a snapshot of this slide, I think Nicola will probably put the questions into the chat, and I'll see you in about 12 minutes. So if there are any questions, if there are no questions, I wish you great listening and great hearing of what you all have to say, and I'll see you in a moment.
That's wonderful. I've put a link in the chat as well to where you can see a screenshot of those questions too. So I'm just going to open those rooms up now. So we'll be back in 12 minutes.
It's so great to see so many friendly faces from all over the world. So I hope you had a very stimulating conversation and you practice your listening skills. So for the sake of time, I'm going to invite 2 or 3 of the groups to their presenter to actually share with the whole of us what it is that you heard people say. So what were some of the common challenges and possibilities or patterns and trends that came up in your breakout room? So I don't know the room numbers, so I just invite those of you who have been nominated as presenters to unmute yourself and let's get started.
I'll jump in just for a second because I really want to appreciate Nicola McNicholas and Nick Howell, because we had a really interesting discussion. One of the biggest takeaways for me was that what I took away was that we discussed BANI doesn't replace VUCA. VUCA is an external perception for us, and BANI is more internal, personal. So how do we combine them so that we build resilience and learn to live in this world that will not go back to whatever normal is or was?
Nice, a really nice distinction. Thank you. Good. Let's hear from another group.
Okay, I'll just add to that. Yeah, our understanding is that VUCA is the world, and BANI is the person within the world, the feeling, the responses to the world. And what we focused on was anxiety, how people are feeling, ourselves as coaches and our clients, greater levels of anxiety because of COVID, because of Ukraine, because of the financial situation. And I'd say here in the UK, because of who could be the next Prime Minister.
I know, it's scary, isn't it? Thank you, Stephen. Great. Let's hear from some of the other groups. What stood out?
Just a comment, if I can. Hi. Just an observation too about, is it a little bit different depending on geography as well? With a couple of colleagues in our group, Katya and Martin, we're working globally in other parts of the world, to me in the UK, for example. And some areas, perhaps, people are embracing the change and are virtually expecting it as well. So the issue is one more of personal resilience, perhaps, and development of that, rather than all just being about technology and anxiety and that sort of thing. But yeah, being a bit careful about geography mattering.
That's a very interesting point that Matthew made. If I can just quickly share something with the group. Gosh, it's now 12 years ago, my husband and I relocated to the Middle East, and we ended up living there for 6 years. And just to pick up on Matthew's point of geography, in the Middle East, there is a necessity to embrace change because they're always living on the edge of chaos. So that necessity necessitated incredible innovation in both Dubai and in Israel and some of the other countries. But the other thing that it also created was a sense of urgency. There was this sense of urgency that we needed to change and we needed to innovate. And the third point about that is that the application of values. So, for example, in Israel, where I lived, where ImagineNation was born as a startup, is that you had this collision between necessity and what I would call self-transcendence. So being able to make the world a better place, you had this, and that's a lot of what we teach in our Coach for Innovators course. So compare that to Australia. Complacency, inertia, amazing quality of life, no sense of urgency, she'll be right. So it's very much, especially if you're coaching globally, being able to work and adapt and be elastic in your thinking with the different cultures. So thank you, really important point. So let's just hear from one more, and please feel free, this is sharing the collective intelligence. That's also a key strategy. Please feel free to put some of your findings into the chat box because we will share the chat at the end. So let's just hear from one more group.
I could speak. I was nominated by my my co-discussers, Xenia and Iris. We had an amazing conversation and timed out. But in regard to the first question, we all identified with the BANI emotions ourselves, and from that we drew a number of positives. One of the very important ones being an ability to relate better to our clients because we're experiencing it and have experienced these emotions ourselves. Additionally, having it as a source of energy, so that sense of imperative, I guess a little similar to what you're describing in the Middle East, and that necessity colliding with transcendence.
Yes, oh, that's great. I'm glad you picked up on that. I think the other really important thing that Jeanette said is the importance of empathy and compassion. So it's okay for our clients to not, or ourselves to not be okay. And what I've learned is to, like today I had someone come into the coaching session literally in tears saying it's all so futile. Allow people to be where they're at, allow them to accept it and acknowledge it, because if you don't do that, you won't be able to transition them to what Jeanette said, to the possibilities of this situation, which are enormous. So I'm going to go into that. So thank you so much. It sounds like you had some great conversations. I'm now going to go into the case study to share how we dealt with it. So let me go back to my slides. Oh, isn't this technology amazing? So here's my case study. I'm just going to whiz through this. There is a written version of this case study that Nicola is sharing with you, and you can also download it at the ImagineNation website. It is, the link is on there. So why is this case study important? Because it provides evidence, and it also really shares the story. And I think this story will be quite common to a lot of your clients. So as you know, every consulting or coaching assignment begins with a problem. In fact, almost all innovations begin with a problem. In this instance, and I'll just whiz through this quickly, it was a group of very senior leaders in the second year of a global digital transformation in one of the Northern Hemisphere regions. So here's the thing, they knew what mindsets, behaviours and skills they were expected to demonstrate, role model and lead in this journey. They'd done the leadership circle, they'd had a lot of education around how to live this digital transformation. But what happened, and this is why they called us in, they were being avoided and suffering from inertia to actually do it. Largely due because they spent 2.5 years working from home. Because they were medical professionals, they were slightly perfectionistic and mistake-phobic and risk-adverse and good procrastinators. And the way the client described it is they were very busy and they were very fearful of failure and fearful of taking risks, which meant that they couldn't advance and accelerate change-led innovation across their division and across the global organisation. So pretty clear, very simple problem, or you might want to call it. So in a nutshell, they were immobilised by a lack of safety, by a lack of permission to actually think or do things differently, a lack of clarity about how to move forwards. They were totally disassociated, not present. So they're totally lacking in presence. They had incredible trouble being medical professionals with dealing with uncertainty. They were very busy in being transactional. I'll give you an example. One of them said to me, I have to buy the ideation platform for the organisation, which some of you know is a $1 to $3 million investment. Can you help me work out how I can do that? And I said, well, what are the specifications? What do you want the ideation platform to actually do? And she said, well, that's a really good question. So if you know the balcony and dance metaphor, people were in the dance, they were doing the doing. And because many of them had been in the organisation for a really long time, they were very comfortable and they had a lot of knowns and they were unwilling to let those go. So what we had to deal with was their resistance, their risk adversity, and their fear of failure. But here's the point, and it's so obvious, and you all know this, is that there was this big gap. And there is, you know, this is what we're always facing as mentors, as coaches. We know what to do, even in our own lives. Like these guys knew what to do, but they weren't doing it. So very much closing that gap between knowing and doing. So my next question is what have you noticed about how the fear of failure impacts your clients? So giving you an overview of the problem, let me go into how we design the solution. So in a nutshell, again, the first thing that we did was we spent time understanding what the organisational strategy was and what the ultimate vision, mission of the organisation, what they were seeking to achieve. So we knew the shift or the desired outcome, and not only for this group, but for the patients and the users and people within the value chain. So we understood, we set the scene and the context for change. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Otto Scharmer and Peter Senge around theory U and presencing. That was the construct that we used. So we created the lines of sight and alignment to the vision, mission, and strategic intentions. And then we created the space for self-discovery, and the learning and coaching framework enable people to deep dive into the presencing space. So you can see here, based on the principle of you can't solve the problem with the same thinking that created it. So we developed the mindsets, behaviours and skills to deep dive, to let go of the old mental models, to create the space for the new mental models, behaviours and skills to actually help them perform from the whole. So it was a very systemic way of working with the whole person, with the whole group and with the whole system. And that's our learning framework and even the coaching framework we've been using at ImagineNation for many, many years, since I first studied at MIT in Boston with Otto and Peter some time ago. The next thing that we did is we set the context, pretty simple context, for innovative leadership. Now, you can see the reference to this. It's based on the work of Dr. Nick Udall from Riding the Innovation Roller Coaster. We talk about being reactive and responsive and proactive. We're all really good at that stuff. If we're going to shift, use this as an opening for possibilities and opportunities for innovation and change, then we've actually got to provoke and evoke different ways of feeling, thinking, and doing in order to be creative. So in order to create the shift, we had to help people move through these circles. And what we did is we designed a bespoke, deep group learning program to create the shift. We set individual and group benchmarks to create a common language and a common understanding individually and collectively. So, you know, we like to say that every challenge or every problem is an opportunity to create change, as some of you said from the breakout room. So one of the things that I've noticed, and I've been working with clients individually and with groups and organisations all over the world, is that everyone struggles to make sense of innovation. So I'm just going to invite you to put some of the words that you would use to describe innovation, and we'll just quickly check out the range of words that have come up in the chat. So let's just see, Nicola, what are some of the words that are coming up?
Thanks, Janet. Yes, and we're talking about free thinking, forward thinking, breakthroughs, some words, shifting perspectives, creating value, new thinking, new being a theme,
nice.
Change. Off the wall, says Jeanette.
Thank you. That's amazing, because what we do is we do not offer clients with a prescriptive definition. We give them a starting point, and you've put some of the words in there. And whilst this sounds very simple, our starting point is always to introduce 3 key words. Change, so it's change on steroids, something different, be, think, feel, and act differently, that adds value in the minds of a user or a customer for which they will exchange value for. So keywords, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but innovation is about successfully bringing the new to the world differently And what we found was really crucial with every client we work with is to come up with a definition of innovation in your own unique context. So if you're working with a client in that space or you're working in that space, contextualize it to what it means to you and in ways that adds value to the quality of people's lives. If we take it further, it involves knowing how to be present, sense, see, respond to opportunities and solve problems in creative ways that add value to the quality of people's lives in ways they appreciate and cherish. So I'm wondering how many of you are surprised that I've got so many emotional or feeling words in my words around innovation. It's because innovation is driven by a passionate purpose. It's actually emotion that provides the oxygen or the fuel to thrive on what we call the innovation roller coaster. So one of the things that I've spent the last 10 years doing at a global level is coming up with the notion of innovation coaching, or we could say inventing innovation coaching. So it is about difference, it is about value, and it is about change. So what we do, and I'm sure some of you are doing this already as well, is we empower, enable, and equip clients to be, think, and act differently in a BANI world to add value to the quality of people's lives in ways they appreciate and cherish. But here's the thing, in the context, and I know I'm naughty because I'm ICF accredited and EMCC accredited, it's about adopting a range of different stances depending on what your client needs. So in my world, we talk about shifting across being a coach, a facilitator, a mentor, and a teacher. That's the first thing we do, is we're shifting our stance. The other thing that we're doing is we're constantly testing, iterating, and pivoting learning challenges on the run. And it might be, and especially in this case study, we had to do it in the moment in order to keep the group engaged. So that means keeping them to be attentional and intentional. So I want to ask you to reflect for a moment, how flexible are you in shifting your coaching stance and being able to test, iterate, and pivot in the moment in order to give the client what they need? So just to wrap up on what we did in this case study, we started to actually bring to life what it means to fail fast and learn quickly, and what it means to take risks. So pretty simple. We normalised it. How did we normalise it? We normalised it very simply through storytelling. So I would start with a space of intentional vulnerability and tell my worst failure story that I won't share with you all tonight. You need to do my program to hear that. And I then would invite people in the group to start sharing stories about their failures. And then I would set a recreation task to get the group to meet to actually go further with their stories. And I did the same thing about risk. So I then tasked the group to develop a common understanding and language that worked for them that would normalise failure and risk. So, and then started to actually teach them the learning principles of unlearning, learning, and relearning, and how to be effective. So we all know that it's important to fail fast, but very few people understand what it truly means and how to do it safely. So another reflective question is, how might you help clients normalise these greatest fears around failure and risk? So to introduce some of the methodologies that we used a Canadian-based tool from Connective Intelligence called the Growth Leadership Indicator. I won't go into it in detail other than to say it measures your motivation, your mindset, your focus, and your skills. So everybody had a score of against their 21st, of their ability to grow as a leader in a 21st century context. That was really pragmatic, that they loved. And the group had a whole score, and we had the range, so the variation of the range in the group. And then we supported people by doing individual debriefs and we did the big group debrief with the group. So we took a lot of the intellectual property from the Coach for Innovators Certified Program, which is an ICFC CE program that I've been running, testing, iterating and pivoting over 10 years. And we did design that bespoke deep blended learning program. It was all delivered online. We used the growth leadership model, our own curriculum, neuroemergence, so theory U and neuroscience principles across multiple intelligences, startup methodologies, storytelling, a lot of reflective practice using the CCS cards, one-on-one coaching, so each person had 4 coaching sessions, group coaching, and an action learning assignment that actually was a very playful and fun assignment that they really, really enjoyed doing. And of course, human-centered design thinking processes. So teaching them to hit their pause buttons and then to use the action learning and the recreation activities to make sense of what they were learning, to internalize it and apply it on the job. So I'm thinking then of another reflective question on how might you constantly test, iterate and pivot your core methodologies? How can you create this blend that is going to deliver really great results for yourself and your clients? So let's go back into the breakout rooms. You can see a summary of what we did, and please feel free to take a screenshot. The first thing we did in this was set the scene and context for change. We shared the leadership and learning frames. We helped the group develop a common understanding and a language. Flexibility about shifting the coaching stances. We normalised failure and risk, and we constantly tested and iterated and pivoted the methodology. So I'm going to invite you to go back into the breakout rooms to start to actually go through our little circle. What have you discovered? How might you make sense of it? How can you internalize it and apply it? And respond to those questions, and to come back and we can have a quick share and then start to wrap up. So Nicola will put you back into breakout rooms for another 12 minutes. Let's just hear from individuals then. What were some of the things that have stood out for you so far? What shifts can you create, and where might thrive happen? Here's Jafar.
Yeah,
Jafar, where are you calling from?
London, beautiful London. And you're about 9-hour difference to you. So here it's just after 12 o'clock. And there are lots of things that came up, and I'll just say 1 or 2 things on colleagues. Bruno and Danny might come in. There was something, I'm not sure whether you mentioned that, it probably was implied. The thing that is really important for me is to feel and express trust in the room.
Yes.
That trust is so important, both, and it happens at various levels, really.
Yes.
And then acknowledging humility and vulnerability. both me as a
Yes.
coach, but also what else goes on. And developing that sense of engagement is incremental, and it's not a straight line, it's zigzag. So one has to always pay attention to it. One has to be, keep the temperature of it and check in with people, with ourselves, where we are. So I don't see myself as a teacher. Teaching might happen, but I don't set out to be a teacher. I'm there to hold a space for that honesty to emerge, really. And I'm not the most important person. We do it together. So they have a role as well.
Jeff has just made some really good points. One of the things that we teach in our program is to create a collective holding space. And it's psychological safety on steroids. Psychological safety is just the foundation. The collective holding space where it is not about me, it is totally about being intentional, using the words humble and vulnerable and loving the client unconditionally without them even knowing that you're doing that. So it is about what Jafar said of paying attention and being very intentional. Great, thank you. Let's hear from a few others before we go into our wrap-up. Just curious to hear what else came up. One more person, be brave.
Just a brief observation. I think because several of us do more sort of individual coaching as opposed to working with a team or an organisation as a whole, it was just that discussion about that more blended approach you might need for the sort of thing you've been talking about, Janet, and how it works with an organisation to in terms of transformation. So it got us talking a little bit about the work with, say, a top team in an organisation, but also what you might do with the individuals. And we didn't know whether you might coach the individuals in that team that you were working with, as well as work with them as a whole. So that was one of our questions, I think.
That's a really great point. You'll actually find that in the next few years, the edges between coaching, training and facilitating and teaching will start to blur a lot more. So I know a lot of my colleagues here in Australia, if they've never been a trainer or a facilitator, they're learning those skills. And a lot of my friends that are trainers and facilitators are learning coaching skills. So great point. Thank you. Okay, so unless someone else has a sense of urgency for what we want for sharing, let me go back to wrapping up. I just want to share with you the results that we achieved. I talk about co-creation. So my team didn't do this in a collaborative, safe, collective holding space. We did create the permission, tolerance, and trust to shift the mindsets, rethink, and start to role model what they were expected to do. We did co-create the common understanding and language for innovation, smart risk-taking, and failing fast. We built what we call discomfort resilience. So we reframed making mistakes and failures as opportunities for learning and change. We enabled them to challenge the status quo, communicate and collaborate. We built a lot of self-efficacy and actually leadership competencies aligned to the tool. And you can see here, let me just show you, we help them be fearless. This is the little badge that we developed on their certificates of completion. I am a face everything and rise hero. Beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. And finally, we expanded their emotional capacity and grit. And I think this is a really key point. I don't have time to explain it in a lot of detail, but what we did is, because of COVID and working from home, people have gotten quite sloppy. So I'm noticing, and some of you might be noticing, that people have forgotten to set boundaries and to be self-disciplined and methodical. So what we built, and they were shocked because they said, we're medical practitioners, but we've forgotten to be disciplined and methodical. And they actually had the data showing that they had forgotten. And at the same time, be creative and inventive to flow with chaos. So that's very deep work. And a lot of that was done through the group coaching and the individual coaching. So how we embedded regular recreation activities, reflective practices, and on the job. And again, they became fearless. So one of my last questions is, what are some of the client outcomes you might focus on enabling or delivering as a result of this session? And I'll just invite you to come back on board. I'll turn my screen off in a moment and take a moment to consider what your key takeaway is. And being a good coach, what's one thing you'll stop doing and one thing you'll experiment with, and then so you can earn your fearless badge. And if you want to put just one word into the chat box. So I'll stop my screen and invite you to all come back and to just share some of the takeaways or the stop doings. What can you experiment with? And if you could just all put your one words into the chat box. So we've got from Nicola, seeing a problem for what it is and what it is not. Thank you. So let's unmute and have a quick wrap-up conversation just with the minute or so that's left. Normalising failure, yeah. Great, thank you. Please unmute yourselves. This is sharing collective intelligence. That's what we enabled the group to do. That was one of the biggest outputs from that whole process. There's so much intelligence, and in this group, relearning, yes, that's great. Vulnerability, challenging the status quo, great. Does anybody want to share anything live in a word?
Janet, something that I'm thinking about is about managing that paradox of fast and slow, because in a way we have a lot of time and also we have little time, and that's really, really important.
That's a key learning. Thank you, Jeff. In our Coach for Innovators program is how to work with two trains of thought simultaneously. So we talk about both and you talked about fast and slow. So thank you. That's a great input. Yes, greater use of language to normalise risk. Is there just one more share from somebody live? Yes,
Andy.
I'd like to know. I love the way you lifted this polarity between rigidity and innovation and flexibility. How did you work with it? I work with teams myself and groups. Were you using anything special when you were working with this, or how did you go about it?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking. It was, I guess, it's really working with people, like asking the client, what's your desired outcome? And really just simply using the GROW model to generate options. And if someone doesn't come in with some simple things like, I need to learn to say no, I need to learn to set boundaries. So the girl, for example, today, who was feeling, that everything was impossible and futile, I helped her identify what she could actually control and created the safe collective holding space for her to come up and say, oh, I need to start doing my morning practice again. So she came up with, well, I need to do my 5 minutes meditation. I need to do my 20 minutes bike ride. So it's just creating that holding space where people can realise for themselves that they need, you know, or asking the question is, you know, how might you be more mindful around that? Or how might you introduce something, you know, that creates more regularity in your life? Yes. Great. Thank you. Good question. I hope I answered it. It's also, if you look up Dan Siegel's work, he's the master of that, and I'm doing his course at the moment, and I really recommend, because he says it comes from a therapeutic background. My mother was bipolar, so he will talk about, in a therapeutic situation, you have the mania, which is the chaos, and you have the rigidity, which is when they freeze. And he says that in order to get flow, you need to integrate both. So therefore, you're creating structure and discipline, both structure and discipline, taking Jafar's point around working with polarities or with paradox, and also being able to be curious and creative and playful. So it's both and. And I think that's a really key element of our work in innovation coaching.
Sorry, I missed the name. What was his name?
Yeah, Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up now. Thank you all for paying your such deep attention. You can see I love working with groups. I really want to say, just as a finish, we have to continually jumping off cliffs and growing our wings. So I hope you grow some really beautiful angel wings as a result of this session. And please feel free to connect with me. I'm pretty active on the social media. If you don't connect with me on LinkedIn, then join the ImagineNation community. We are award-winning bloggers on the people side of innovation. And I also run a global online coach for innovators, leaders and teams certified program that is ICFCCE accredited, 36 units, and it's a group, a maximum of 8 to 10 people, and it does certify you as a professional coach for innovators, and you get all of our lovely IP. So the super early bird is available to all of you, and that will expire on the 2nd of September. So, so if there are any other questions, I know we're staying on for networking. I'm really happy as well to stay on for networking. So for those of you that need to go, please go and have an amazing day. Stay safe and well. And for those of you that wish to stay on and network and ask me more questions, I'm more than happy to share what it is that I've discovered in my innovation learning journey. So thank you all. Be safe, be well, and go out and make the difference that you want to make in the world.
Thank you so much, Janet, on behalf of EMCC Global. We promised to go and make a difference, and there's so much that you spoke about today which had real resonance with everybody. So thank you so much for leading that session for us.